Space Dragon is a virtual reality intergalactic arcade shooter where your hands and your arms are dragons. You blast through the cosmos, destroying planets and suns while trying to free interstellar beasts from evil robotic overlords. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm the community manager for 3 Pound Games, and this is the Space Dragon Developers Roundtable. With me today are Robin Moulder, CEO and co-founder of 3 Pound Games, Chris Castaldi, the technical director for 3 Pound Games, and Cordelia Wolf, 3 Pound's creative director. Robin, first to you. Space Dragon was, to my knowledge, the first virtual reality game that 3 Pound made after shifting away from mobile games. Is that right?
That's correct. We had dabbled a bit in the systems and libraries development. Chris had first hooked me on VR by knowing what kind of a nerd I am. And, I just had this huge Viewmaster collection and been around the block with, all kinds of stereogram and been really super obsessed with that type of technology. And virtual reality is one of those things that, I know I would have found my way into, but what's the right time? And I had been so ahead on so many technologies in the past. I was kind of like holding off a little bit. And he just kept, he knows how to push the buttons, and he kept tantalizing me with like new gear and new tech and, oh, check this out. And one day he came over with HTC Vive, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking amazing. But we're not there yet. This is definitely not really commercially viable. Takes too long to set it up. People are not going to have the appetite for opening up seriously 10 to 12 different little boxes and all this sort of thing. So, from that, we started getting into it, and we, of course, were up there at Best Buy together and like waiting in line to be the first people to buy the Oculus Rift. So it was a very exciting time. And during this time, Chris started building the movement system, and you start building things, you need reasons to build things. So the evolution of Space Dragon was, we all were obsessed with flight. Why would you use your legs when you can fly in VR? It's the best thing ever. Right. So that sort of led to, well, what would we do with flight? And Chris had a video that he passed around that was really, really cool. He's also really into bullet hells. Him and I are both super space Star Trek nerds galore. And the way that we got Cordelia hooked there was, Chris was like, they could be dragons. So it really worked out because, we all got to have an imprint of something cool into the game. The creatures are really magnificent, and they have sort of an organic flair about them, which really kind of hits and taps into Cordelia's special abilities with creatures and making them really magnificent. There's the bullet hell factor, and then the sound, the fact that I could just build this really ridiculously over-the-top soundscape for this that was metal driving, epic, ridiculous, and at times silly, maybe even. So it really hit on all the notes for us as a cool first game to do. While we got to learn how to do virtual reality, we learned all the pitfalls and how to optimize and really dig into it.
Okay. Chris, you and Cordelia are two, like the OGs of, so to speak, of 3 Pound. Was this your first VR project, and what was kind of your background coming into this?
I wouldn't say it was my first VR project. I was working in automotive simulations and was building VR there. But this is definitely the first game application for sure. And
Cordelia, same to you. What was your background coming into this?
So I had always had an interest in art and things, but I was looking at kind of an engineering track for school, and then I sort of discovered the concept of game design and game art being sort of a combination of the two. So with that in mind, I did undergrad painting and sculpture, I did grad with game design, and then I got picked up right away out of grad school by Robin, and we'd been working together ever since on the mobile things for a while. We'd started on a little bit of a PC project right before the VR interest kicked in that Robin talked about, and then with the potential of kind of designing these movement systems, creating something in just this completely new world was really enticing to us. So that kind of drove us into the Space Dragon direction.
Okay, Chris, I want to talk more about the movement system. Robin kind of touched on that earlier. But first, I'm going to read a few of the comments from their reviews on Steam to kind of set this up. From the Horror Network, the movement in this game is commendable, as it's one of the few space titles that hasn't given me motion sickness. Zaya wrote, if you're like me, i.e. uneasy with movement in VR, this game somehow lets you whip around the damn galaxy at warp speeds, eating planets, and doesn't feel, barfy. His phrase, not mine. Dragged in DFO says, surprisingly, despite traveling in the full 3D space, first time in my experience, I experienced almost no motion sickness. What's a big plus? Mecha Tofu Pirate wrote, I'm pretty sensitive to nausea in VR, but I was fine playing this. And I think, yeah, that's it. Chris, for you, for those who haven't played the game, describe the movement system, talk about the inspiration for it, and how long it took to get right for this game.
So the movement system is pretty simple. We originally called it the point and shoot. So you would point the controller where you want to go, press the button, and you go in that direction. So you would rotate your wrist, you want to go left or right or any of that sort of stuff. And the inspiration was, I don't know what the inspiration was, but it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of torturing poor Cordelia with trying out each one of my movement systems and just seeing which one made her sick. So yeah, right, Cordelia?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so yeah, definitely I get sick on literally anything that moves, car sick, train sick, boat sick, what have you.
Oof.
Yeah, it's fun. And so I had a tough time with like a lot of early VR apps when people were still figuring things out. I remember a couple ones like you get VR sick, like you're out for the day practically. It can get real bad.
Right.
But working on these, so we tested, like Chris said, we tested a whole bunch of different stuff. We went through a lot of things, led to some kind of queasy days and stuff like that. But then we got to the kind of the intention focused movement of get your whole body into the movement, which is the point and click. You're pointing your whole arm in that direction, and then you're going that direction. And so it kind of meshed all that stuff together. And so I think all of that queasiness was totally worth it because we just got like really great movement systems to work with out of it. So
You say it's worth it now. I'm sure in the moment you were like, what am I getting myself into? Why did I do this?
Oh, we had fun. I think the important thing is to remember in VR, if you start getting queasy, don't push it. And so keeping that in mind, like I would do short tests and things like that.
Okay, so moving to the MetaQuest 2 release of the game, and Cordelia, will start with you. As I understand it, you initially started working on this port in your spare time. What made you want to redo that or revisit that?
So I would go back and kind of try out the game to see some of the stuff we did while we were working on other apps and kind of how we're just reflecting on some of our approaches in it. And every time I got into it, it was just I would go to check one thing out and I'd end up playing the whole game because it was just fun and realizing just like as a developer, when you play games, there's definitely like a tendency of like you can get kind of sick of your own game, and a lot of developers just can't play the game when it's actually out. But like being able to get back into it and just like have a blast with it made me realize that we really wanted to be able to bring it back because a lot of the PC stuff, the standalone was taking over. And so and then with the very like open mechanics with the very open layout of it and things like that, the freedom of the standalone just seemed to kind of fit with it really well.
Okay. And
so we were also working on other Quest titles at the time, kind of some early development on a few things. And I also thought from an art perspective and just general design perspective, it would be good practice just to kind of try out, like, let me see if this can actually work. And so lo and behold, they did. And when they got running smoothly and stuff, and I got a working build thrown on there, I brought it up with Robin and Chris and went from there.
Okay, so Chris, when you first saw it, how far along was the port when Cordelia brought it to the team, and what did you think about it when she presented it, about the idea of porting it to Quest?
It was pretty far along. We'd done a lot of optimization in the beginning to get Space Dragon working in general, and just I was so excited to get it on the Quest because the freedom of movement and flying around with each of the dragons, it's exactly what it's made for. You can spin around, it's really great.
Okay, Robin, the CEO, you kind of have to weigh return on investment and whether it's not worth your time to work on the game that you did years ago versus working on new stuff. Was this a no-brainer for you? Did you have to think about it for a while?
I'd say it was a no-brainer. Space Dragon is just such a great game, and I've had that same experience that Cordelia has. And I've seen Chris and I would do it all the time. We're just going in to test one little thing. Oh, let's just do this one, and then we're 3 levels in, and you're like, oh, this is just too addicting. So I mean, our only pause was really just in the fact that the game's a little on the short side. But that's also awesome because you can get in, you can finish it, you can have a great time, and you feel really good and really powerful when playing it. And I think when you're a developer, sometimes you worry too much about too many things. So we decided to stop worrying so much and just go ahead and get it out there. We knew it would take a little bit of time, and we knew it was really worth it. It was an opportunity to go back and kind of like, fix a few things up and refactor a few little things here and there, and then talk about the future, talk about where we could go with this project. And all of the hopes and dreams that we ever had with this project are now back available for us as options. Once we have this out, do we want to put out another Space Dragon in the future? Do we want to expand this property? And now we can have those conversations because we're launching it for Quest, and there's a much bigger user base now than there used to be. So as Chris said, this is, now that it's on Quest, it feels like where it should have always been, where you're free. I'm free to fly to the universe and blow shit up.
Right. That makes perfect sense. I actually want to stay with you. Specifically on the music, was it weird or difficult diving back into a score in a project that you worked on years ago? Were you kind of excited to revisit it now that you've had so many years of experience between when you first made it and now?
Music is always such a weird one because you go back to projects and it's almost like somebody else did it, and it takes you a while to kind of wrap your brain back around to where you were then and what you were thinking then. I felt like I sort of fell back into it pretty quickly. And then I had that moment. I contacted Cordelia about this actually when I was, there wasn't so much a lot of music refactoring in this as there were sound effects. There were a lot of sound effects updated. I've been through a bunch of different audio systems on this project due to performance issues. Like when you have a bullet hell, you have a lot of sound effects coming at your face, and those are not very performant. So there's been a lot of churn on that, and I do have the hope of doing more refactoring in the future with a much better system that I'm super in love with. So at one point, though, when I was doing a few sound updates, I hit up Cordelia, and I'm like, you know how we're ready for the next version of Space Dragon? It's because I just had this. How in the world am I going to write a song that fits with this music, like now, today? And that's always the moment that you have right before you write the next song for the thing. There's always sort of a little valley that you fall into, and then you'll have that breakthrough, and then you'll go write like 3 more songs that fit perfectly with that set of music. And so I've actually been noodling on that stuff, like planning for the future, planning for new levels, that sort of thing, and already kind of setting up the the audio for where we're going with Space Dragon in the future.
Some of that sounded like a tease for the next game. Just gonna put that out there.
Maybe.
Yeah. Cordelia, from a visual standpoint, obviously porting down from PCVR down standalone presents some challenges and some not fun decisions as a designer and developer. What were some of the pain points you had as you were going through the port process?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff definitely to bring down. Like Chris said, we had done a lot of optimization because early days, even on PC, you still needed some decent optimization to have it run properly. They've done a lot on the hardware and provider software side of also improving performance and things like that. So some of the big stuff was particles had to get reduced down a lot, but it was interesting because on the one hand we had to reduce the particles down a lot. On the other hand, it'd been several years since we made them, so we have a lot more particle libraries and just knowledge and understanding of how to build nice particles in general. So while there was a lot of reducing going on, there was also some improving going on at the same time. We had to lose post-processing, specifically the bloom, which is sort of the glowiness that bright things can get in an app.
Right.
And we're hoping to bring that back at some point, but it's just one of those things that on mobile is a little more expensive performance-wise. It was also digging through pretty much each and every model and each and every effect and all of the different textures and materials, making sure everything was lined up, everything was as performed as possible, which is, you do that on games in general, but when you're really having to like push and push and push on the performance, it's every single item has to get gone over and double triple checked. And then we also did a lot of rebuilding. We have some unique shaders in the game, and there was a lot of rebuilding of those because not only were they built on older systems, they also were not built with mobile performance in mind. So
right.
Rebuilding them to have the same look, but to be a lot more performant. But all of it, it's all difficult, but it's also fun. It's like a challenge game that you find all these little spots and you change the dials and you get everything to line up and you get that performance out of it. So
Chris, Cordelia, and Robin both kind of touched on this, but optimization is something that I know personally care pretty deeply about. On our Twitch channel, we devoted a whole stream to just reviewing optimization for the Quest version of the game. Is it different working from existing content versus building something up from the ground up yourself from scratch in terms of optimizing?
Yes, so for optimization, the big difference is that you have to get rid of things that you have already fallen in love with, as Cordelia mentioned a few times. So when the game already exists and then you have to monetize it over, you're not working from the ground up and being like, okay, we're making a game for the Quest. When you have a game when you're making a game for PCVR, you just, you have all these options, everything, sky's the limit, particles everywhere, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Since you already have that, you're like, well, okay, now we have to reduce all that and still keep the same feel of the game, which that becomes the big problem. And then also, as Cordelia said, going back with old stuff, you're basically looking at yourself like, what was I thinking back then? This was a terrible idea. Why would I do this to myself? But yeah.
How often did that happen? Was it like the whole time through, like just shaking your head the whole time, or?
Oh, definitely. Shaved my head the whole time. And Cordelia did the same thing. There was a couple times where her and I found models and we're like, what did you do, Cordelia? Why is this a million polys? What were you thinking? And we weren't. That's the answer.
Robin, VR can present some unique challenges in terms of accessibility for people with physical differences or handicaps that you as developers don't really think about or may not have to think about for a flat screen game. On the audio side of things, how does that affect some of your decisions for sound?
For sound, one of the things that's really important is to make sure that anything that is voiced or said is written on the screen somewhere. That's one of our big mantras, because Cordelia is a little on the audio processing side, so she likes to read, and I'm the complete opposite. I don't like to read anything. I like everything told to me. Unfortunately, Space Dragon doesn't have any voicing in it currently. That's another one of those hopeful future things, but that is one of our mantras. In Space Dragon, one of the topics that we were constantly talking about were things like, what if you're in a wheelchair? What if you just want to play seated? What if you don't have the space in your room to have a whole space to play this game? How can we make it so that you don't have to be standing? You don't have to be doing this. You don't have to be doing that. What if you're left-handed? Chris and I are both left-handed, so we've outnumbered Cordelia on every chance we get for being left-handed. We like to make sure that we don't go into a game. And it's really, really frustrating as a left-handed person to go into a game and you have no choice but to do things a certain way. It actually ruins the experience. There's a couple of games on the Quest Store I can't play because I can't get over the fact that they flop the controls in such a way that it makes it so awkward for me. And I don't want to take the time to have to learn that. What if I was missing fingers? What if I didn't have my left arm at all? We like to think about these things of, can we make things in a way that let more people have accessibility to this game? Because there's a lot of gamers out there and we want to include as many people as possible. It's tricky when you're talking about two controllers and, with Space Dragon, we have two dragons. Technically, you could play this game one-handed, I think. I don't know if that's 100% true, but you can move and you can shoot. It would be a slow game for you, but I think it could be done. So we're always considering that. We're always keeping the eye out for, how can we make it the most clear and the most understandable to people from an audio perspective too. Always make sure that the story is also kind of being carried in the audio. So you'll hear when you come up on the planets, and there's a bit of a digital effect going on when you see the planet thing there, and it's like, oh, that echoes back, and it echoes through the levels, and it echoes into the AI core.
Right.
So there's some of those little hint themes that give you an idea of this is communicating with that disconnected from this. And so that way you carry some of those sort of in the back of your mind subconsciously. So even if you missed out on something because you weren't reading a thing or you weren't paying attention to the thing, hopefully you picked up on it in the back of your mind.
Okay, Chris, Robin kind of touched on a good chunk of this in terms of you both being left-handed and working on the accessibility piece for that. But I think the movement system also could play into that, on top of the movement system being really important for the comfort of the player as well. How's the movement system help with accessibility for the game?
Well, there's a couple of things we did. As we talked about, it's more about pointing and shooting, and we're pretty good at pointing as humans in general. So pointing to where we have to go is something we do naturally, and just pressing one button. So you didn't have to teach people how to use a thumbstick, any of that sort of stuff. The second thing to keep in mind is that we had two versions. We had the warp, and then your normal movement. If you press both, you go a bit faster. But the big key to that was not having a ground plane. It takes one place 100% in space. So there's no fear of falling. There's no fear.
Right.
You're not. You don't have to worry about looking up or down necessarily because there's no ground plane. The last thing is that, unlike a lot of other VR games, you're not really the person. Like in most VR games, you
That's
actually
true.
have your hands. In this case, you actually have dragons. So you're not even really there. You maybe have them attached to your chariot, but you're not a person. You're just a viewpoint.
Okay, and that degree of removal kind of helps with the comfort level of it too.
Yeah.
Those guys.
We actually did a test with this once where we put people, if we had them fly and move up, if they fly and move up and they were in a normal, like, a room, they were like, oh, I feel weird. But if you did that and they're in water or space, they're like, oh yeah, this is totally what happens. So the environment plays a really big role on helping with the simulator sickness.
Cordelia, you have something to follow up on?
In regards to being the dragons instead of being a character, is that you have kind of two ways of approaching representation of games. You either have every option ever, and that can be hard to do, but it's definitely a worthwhile thing to do, or you also can have it so you just something else entirely. And that's been something that we've been very fond of doing with the games, is like, let's try and be something that is completely different. I mean, VR is such a perfect place for that. You've got the ability to be anything you want to be. So it like, especially if you've got a situation that maybe you don't want to have to acknowledge in the game, but is otherwise breaking immersion for yourself by not being there. Space Dragon, I mean, you can play it completely seated. You can play it. You don't have to do any moving around. You just kind of, you are the dragons and you just fly around space and kind of do whatever you want.
Robin, one of the new features of the game that I personally am really excited about is the Twitch chat widget. Where did that idea come from?
So this really comes from me watching you, Mike. Thanks to Live Open Mike, I got really heavily into the Twitch community because he played one of our games, and it really opened my eyes to how important it is to watch other people play your game and just really be involved in that community. And it really, it kind of just threw me right back to playing games in the arcade. And this is what we used to do. Like, we used to, like, you'd be up there, I'm playing Galaga, because we all know I'm a Galaga expert. And people gather around and they're commenting and they're involved and they're like giving you hints or like, oh, and I can't believe that happened. You know, it's just such a cool little thing that happens, like that created community. And that's what Twitch is. And it's remarkable. And to watch you play the game and watch you play VR games and struggle on the Quest, because you have to like peek in the chat and oh my God, like, and I heard you say multiple times, like, this is one of the big reasons why people won't play Quest games, is because they can't see their Twitch chat. That's a big problem. And we were also working on another project where we were doing a polling in YouTube videos in this project. I'm like, well, why can't we do this? So of course I go to Chris, like, can we do this? And Chris is like, yeah, I got this. And I'm like, you know, it's gonna spin you out. Don't spend a lot of time. Well, it was like 15 minutes later. He's like, oh, hang on, I got this. It was a classic Chris Castaldi move right there, where he came back and had come up with an even better solution, even faster than anyone could ever have imagined.
Okay, well, Chris, that's a perfect segue to you. In terms of the way the widget actually works, it sits on your left wrist and it can be open and closed with a button. How many versions of the widget did you go through before settling on that setup?
Not really where the widget itself visually, we knew it was going to be. It was where the widget was actually going to go.
Right.
And this actually harkens back to the original design, is that we had to deal with the Vive controllers, the original Vive controllers with their two buttons, the Vive wands, I believe they were called, and then the Oculus will say. Now, the Oculus, which is basically just a normal gamepad chopped in half, we didn't have any extra buttons, so we couldn't add any extra features. So we realized when we were playing through Space Dragon, I'm like, oh, wait, we have like 5 buttons we're not using because we designed it only for 2. And then after that, figuring out, oh, we're going to turn on and off with a button. Well, that makes it a lot easier, so we don't have to worry about people flipping their wrists or any of that sort of stuff. They can just summon it or not summon it when they need to. Deciding where the wrist had to go, that was something where I was basically spending a lot of time of like, if I'm going to read something, I'm going to need it on my arm, because we originally put it in front of the player. And it would just pop up in front of them or to the side, and then we found people who were leaning, and I'm like, no, put it on the hand, and then think of it like a wristwatch. It's kind of natural for people to like look at their wrist and bring it closer to them if they want to read something. So having it on that position helped readability, and then someone could be like, oh yeah, hey, I'm gonna go look at the chat.
Cordelia, how challenging was it to build the user interface for the widget itself?
The UI itself, like the direct UI of the text was not too hard. It's a scrolling text window, which is fairly standard. The tricky part was that in Space Dragon, because it was such an early project, early days VR, we didn't have any direct UI interactions at the time. We had, you shoot at the UI and that makes it work. And so for logging into Twitch, you need a keyboard. So we had to do some figuring out to make it, how can we make an entire keyboard that you can shoot at accurately, hit the actual buttons and type in without it being a massive pain in the butt. So that took a little bit of tinkering with, but I think we got something that works out pretty nicely. It seems like it's pretty fun to shoot your name out.
As a Twitch streamer, thank all 3 of you. I appreciate it, because like Robin alluded to when she was in my stream, it's hard using TTS and things like that. Cordelia, I want to stay with you. Did you have any names for the dragons while you were developing them or designing them?
Actually, specifically, I did not name the dragons because I'm really fond of kind of people being able to put themselves into the game and kind of create their own stories for it. So I figure that people will be creating their personalities for the dragons. Like, we've seen so many people that go in the game and they've got their little dragons and they start talking to each other and they like do silly things and basically play puppets with them because they're really fun. They've got a whole like IK that goes out the tail and you can kind of make them do puppet things, and so people will play with them. And I wanted to give people the option to like let the players create their own kind of story for the dragons. And so we might even think about putting something in where you can actually like create the name for them, but it's more sort of your personal opinion of them. And that's kind of how we approach the whole story of the game. Is, I mean, we definitely have our interpretations of what's going on, and we have, I mean, some stuff is fairly defined, but a lot of the background, while we have like, we were working from ideas, we kind of let people fill in sort of what they think's going on. And it'll be interesting for the future titles also to see where that goes.
Okay, to close this out, I'm going to ask you all the exact same question. Pitch us on the game. We'll start with Robin. Why should people play Space Dragon?
You should play Space Dragon because you can finally do what you've always wanted to do to the world and blow it up. Everybody has this fantasy at one point or another, like the political climate, I mean, whatever news item that you logged into today and it's frustrating you, you could just turn it off and go get the cathartic feeling of blowing up the world. How can you go wrong with that?
Okay, saying to Chris, why do you think people should play Space Dragon?
I think people should play Space Dragon because it's a unique flight sim where you have the true freedom of movement. And there's very few games out there that you can actually like just fly around and, of course, as Robin said, blow up planets.
And Cordelia, you're going to be the closer for the entire roundtable. Why, in your opinion, should people play Space Dragon?
Well, the obvious answer is a lot of fun. And also, I'm a big fan of dragons and dragon games, and in this game you can be not just one but 2 dragons, so can't go wrong.
All right, that's going to do it for the 3-Pound Developers Roundtable for Space Dragon. I want to thank Robin, Chris, and Cordelia for being very generous with their time and sitting down to talk to me about this. I appreciate everyone watching. We'll see you in the next roundtable.